Welcome to The Reins of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you lead with presence and influence with trust. I'm your host, Marinda Smith, business leadership strategist, sharing actionable insights on mindset, EQ and energy uniquely illuminated by wisdom gained alongside my equine partners. Hello and welcome to The Reins of Leadership. Have you ever had one of those moments where the world seems to snap into a new focus? Maybe you've been learning a new skill, one that truly pushed your boundaries and challenged who you thought you were. As the days moved on, you perhaps wondered if you actually had been learning anything significant. And then maybe sometime later you're standing somewhere familiar or talking to someone you know well, settings where you feel comfortable and known. And yet in that instant, it's like a lens shifts inside you. You feel the shift. Everything looks different. Not because the external world changed, but because something fundamentally within you did. It feels sudden, even if the seeds for that change were planted long before that learning process. It's more than just learning a new fact or skill, it's deeper. It's a fundamental change in perspective, a rearrangement of your inner landscape, sometimes even your sense of self. It's about seeing the world and your place in it anew. That shift is the heart of transformational learning. And today we're exploring what that really means for us as leaders, as humans, and perhaps surprisingly we'll do it through the quiet wisdom found in the dusty or not so dusty paddock with the green grass coming through of the horses and the donkeys. Sometimes the most profound lessons come from those most unexpected teachers. Before we dive into the mechanics of transformational learning, perhaps the focus on inner alignment and authenticity is already striking a chord. And if that is something that sounds familiar to you, then I want to offer you something. It's my free guide called The Secret to Success. It's designed specifically to help you bridge that gap between external achievement and internal satisfaction. It really is a practical guide. I know that you're busy, and so I've made it as simple as possible for you. It's free, it's downloadable, and you can get it right now at marindasmith.com.au. That's marindasmith.com.au. It's a great resource for building a business and leadership style that truly fulfills you. Now let's return to that deeper journey of re-seeing what exactly is transformational learning. We learn things every day. We learn how to use new software, and let me tell you, there's always new software coming up that I need to be learning. The details of projects, maybe even a new recipe. That's informative learning. Adding to our existing knowledge base, it stacks information neatly into our existing shelves. But transformational learning, that's different. It's about changing the structure of how we know, not just the content. Think of it less like adding files to your computer and more like upgrading the entire operating system. It's about rebuilding the shelves themselves. Jack Mezirow, a sociologist and a key voice in adult education, described it as the process of becoming critically aware of how and why our assumptions have come to constrain the way we perceive, understand, and feel about our world. It's about examining the very frames of reference, the beliefs we have, the values, and the habits of our mind that all shape our reality. These frames are often invisible to us, yet like lenses we wear until something makes us take them off and look at them instead of just through them. Often this process isn't gentle, and let me tell you, I know I've been there. And what Mezirow calls it is a disorientating dilemma. It's a challenge, a loss, a significant life change, maybe even feedback that hits hard because it rings true. That discombobulation. Something happens that makes our old way of seeing things feel inadequate, broken even. And that discomfort, that's the doorway. It invites us, sometimes forces us to step back, to question those long-held beliefs we thought were just the way things are, to reflect deeply, not just on what happened, but on why we reacted the way we did, why we believe what we believe, and then to actually question yourself, is that true? And if it isn't true, then to maybe release that belief. This is where the real work begins, in that space of uncomfortable questioning. When we integrate those insights, that's when the transformation occurs. We don't just learn something new, we fundamentally become someone new because we've reprogrammed our beliefs, our operating system. And the more aware, perhaps more compassionate, more open we become, our operating system is upgraded. So it's not just academic theory. I'm not talking about that. In leadership, this capacity for transformation is critical. We're living in a world that demands constant adaptation, navigating complexity and, creating those genuine connections. Whether it's online or face-to-face or even in social media. The leaders who question their own assumptions, reflect honestly and integrate new perspectives aren't just more effective, they're more resilient, more authentic, and they create a better business. They are more human and it is reflected in everything they do. I want to tell you a story about Mark and one of my mares, Jade. Mark was an experienced rider, so he was that confident, capable and well-practiced rider where he'd spent years in the saddle. He knew how to work with horses and to get results. He was skilled at setting goals and expecting the horses to respond when he gave aids. And riding had always been a space where he felt competent and in control. It was his frame of reference for horsemanship that was built on clarity, consistency, and achieving his goals. Then he met Jade. So Jade and Mark were put together during a series of equine-assisted leadership sessions that Mark had decided to attend. Not because he needed help with horses, but because he was curious about how this work might translate into his leadership. Even though he was curious about himself and the way that he led, he still came with that certainty. He knew horses. But Jade wasn't like the horses that Mark was used to riding. She is super sensitive. She's quick to react and she's easily overwhelmed by pressure. Where other horses might yield or respond when given a cue, in Mark's way of riding, Jade would not do that at all. She would either freeze or react, where she'd fidget and fret, and sometimes she would let you know. If you weren't listening, she would let you know in another more forceful way. And the more Mark tried to direct her, the more disconnected that she became. What worked for Mark in his tent and firm boundaries just didn't land with Jade. When she didn't respond the way he wanted or expected her to, Mark's first instinct was to push through, to ask again, get firmer, stay consistent. And this had always worked for him. During the facilitation sessions, we talked about what was going on for him and what was happening with Jade. Yet it took a while because what he was doing wasn't working with Jade, and as we reflected, it was also happening and playing out in his leadership role. The more he pushed, the more resistant she became. She became so fidgety and not listening, and the lessons, the work that Mark was doing with her became frustrating. And he became frustrated, questioning himself, why isn't this working? I've been around horses for years. What am I doing wrong? So we started to break down his usual methods and to reflect upon the feedback that Jade was giving him. And through the sessions and facilitation, things started to shift. And I could see it was taking tiny reflections initially, and yet slowly Mark began to slow down. And he stopped trying to ride the session and simply observing Jade. So he wasn't pushing through and demanding that she did something. He started to listen and observe what she was showing him. And I noticed over time that he began to notice how she communicated, not with those big gestures that she had been giving, but now with softer, more micro signals. It was the placement of her ear, a shift in her weight, the soft tension across the shoulders. He realized she wasn't being difficult, and yet she was actually being honest. Very honest. She's a very honest pony. What Mark had seen as resistance was actually Jade giving him true feedback. And that feedback wasn't about how she felt. It was rather feedback about how he was showing up. So he started reflecting, not just on her, but on himself and his leadership, his assumptions that he made, and his reliance on control. He was questioning his technique, and he was starting to examine his underlying assumptions about control, communication, and even success. He was looking at his frames of reference. They were being challenged big time. He recognized how his focus had been on outcomes rather than experience for himself, for others, for the horse. So after a few weeks of him attending sessions, he started to try a different approach. These sessions were over weeks where he'd come for a session every week. And during that, he'd go back to the workplace. So when he was in the workplace, he was trying different approaches. He was taking the lessons from the paddock and he was putting them into his leadership. And what he found was he was softening. He was inviting rather than demanding. And he practiced noticing and responding, not just acting and playing out this is my role in the workplace and again in the paddock. And slowly I noticed that Jade began to respond with curiosity instead of caution. And that was in the space that trust began to grow. This breakthrough came when Mark realised it wasn't about the technique, it was about his presence, his way of being. So Mark learned so many things with this beautiful, sensitive pony, and he redefined what leadership meant to him. He integrated his insights and shifted his perspective. He discovered that influence isn't about pressure, it's about presence. That clarity doesn't require control, that connection always comes before direction. And this wasn't adding just a new file to his already full filing case. His internal operating system had fundamentally changed. Therefore, the lesson stayed with him long after the sessions ended in the paddock, and it transformed how he saw himself, not just as a rider and a commanding leader, but as a true person and being that empathetic, authentic leader. Sometimes the greatest leadership growth doesn't happen in the boardroom. It happens in the quiet paddock, in the moment like when Jade asks us to show up differently. It happens when we allow ourselves to be truly changed by an experience. Mark's journey with Jade isn't just a heartwarming horse story, and I wanted to bring it to you because to me it's a powerful metaphor for the kind of inner work that fuels impactful leadership at any context. And this is the whole point of these podcasts, to give you those stories, those learnings that I've seen in the paddock and felt myself, and to apply it in the workplace, which I also have done, yet I've seen and helped so many individuals to do. And it's my goal for you to apply it in your workplaces, with your teams. In our workplaces, in our teams, we invest so much time and energy on strategy, skills training, and process improvement, the doing of leadership. And yes, those things absolutely matter. They are essential tools. They are the informative learning that I spoke of earlier. Yet transformational learning addresses the being of leadership, who we are being when we walk into that meeting, who we are being when we give feedback, who we are being when things get tough. As Mark discovered, how we show up internally dictates the quality of that interaction. So when we engage in this deeper learning, prompted perhaps by our own disorientated dilemmas at work, we start to remove those outdated versions of ourselves, to do some reprogramming of those assumptions, the biases, the protective masks that we wear, often unconsciously. And we let go of the need to always have the right answer. and to appear stronger or certain. When we work on our inner self, our inner leadership, we develop the capacity for deeper listening to others and to ourselves. We lead more authentically, more empathetically, and with more courage and, yes, more compassion. We move from managing tasks to creating connection and trust. Think about it. Just like Jade sensed Mark's internal state, our teams, our colleagues, they sense ours. They feel the pressure of our agendas, our anxieties, our need to control. They also feel our presence, our centeredness, our genuine curiosity. They don't need us to do more frantic things. Often they just need us to be more aligned, more aware, more grounded, more trustworthy. Transformational learning is that pathway going into your inner leadership to becoming the leader that the world actually needs. So let's bring it all together. Transformational learning is not about adding more knowledge. It's fundamentally shifting how we see ourselves and the world, upgrading our internal operating system. Through Mark's experience with Jade, we see how that disorientating struggle led to reflection, challenged his core assumptions, and then resulted in a shift, a total shift of his reality. So when we are vulnerable and we lead with that courage and we soften our grip and we question our assumptions, we become more attuned to others and to ourselves. And it's in these quiet moments of re-seeing that our most authentic and effective leadership emerges. So as we close today, I invite you to consider this. What's a belief that you've held on to for a long time, perhaps about yourself as a leader, about what leadership is, or about how change happens, that might be ready for a gentle challenge? Now, I don't want you to wrestle it to the ground, maybe just notice it. And often those things that happen that we hold true of being who we are, maybe they supported us in a younger life, a younger version of ourselves, and maybe they're not supporting us now. So when you do find it and notice it and sit with it with curiosity, just like Mark learned to observe Jade with openness instead of judgment, just ask yourself, where did this come from? How does it serve me now? Is it still serving me now? And what might be another way to see this? Because sometimes the most powerful shifts happen when we are softening our approach and not tightening our grip. And that is what the Reins of Leadership brings with you this week. Have a think, reflect. Thanks for joining me on the Reins of Leadership. Remember to lead with presence and influence with trust. Subscribe for more insights and find resources at mirindasmith.podia.com.